Good morning, everybody. It's been nice to chat with all of you as we get warmed up on this Friday morning before Thanksgiving. We have a quick agenda today, and really what we want to do is try to focus on some of the items that are happening in our world post-election, primarily today, Propositions 207 and 208, and Otto Schill Esquire has agreed to give us the benefit of his knowledge on this. But first, I think we'll ask Mr. Emmert to set us up for it. And again, thank you everyone for being here.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I apologize to pretty much half the people on this call because you've already seen this, but it'll set the stage again for Otto's discussion to drill down into the propositions a little deeper. We had an election, and let's take a look at what is happening in Arizona as kind of a backdrop. In 2016, we had 6.9 million people in Arizona. That has increased over time to 7.3 in 2019. We're probably somewhere around 7.4, 7.5 in 2020. But what's happening is people are moving here from other parts of the country, New York, Chicago, and a lot are coming in from California, and they're bringing their politics here. So what we're seeing is kind of a moderating of the Arizona electorate. Typically, we've been in a red state, but we got a mixed bag this election. We had, of course, President Trump lost the presidential election here, and then Mark Kelly was voted in as senator for the state, both Democrats. But if you look at what happened at the counties and at the local level, a lot of Republicans got in. So we're getting kind of a mixed bag, but we're turning more purple, if you will, over time. You all know what happened with the federal elections. I won't address those other than to say that our two endorsed candidates, Mesa Chamber of Commerce endorsed candidates and incumbents, Andy Biggs and Greg Stanton, got back into their seats. So let's look at the state level. In the Arizona House, numbers will stay the same. Republicans will remain in control, 31-29. There were some changes. There were some flips in some seats between both Democrats and Republicans, but the numbers remain the same. Our speaker will remain from Mesa, Rusty Bowers. Travis Grantham from down in Gilbert, great guy, will be kind of moving the bills through the system at the chair. Majority Leader is Ben Toma, and then Majority Whip is Leo Biasucci. On the Democrat side of the House, Minority Leader is Reginald Boulding, Jennifer Longden is the Assistant Minority Leader, and then Representative DeGrazia from Tucson is the Whip. These are the committee chairs. I won't go through all of them. Just to say that Representative Winninger, who's from Chandler, retained his Commerce Chair seat, as did Regina Cobb. All this bodes well for business overall. In the Senate, Democrats did pick up a seat. We're currently at 17-13. Republicans will retain control, but their power decreased a little bit by 16-14. So no changes in leadership on the Senate Republican side. On the Democrat side, there were a few changes. We've got Rebecca Rios in the Minority Leader position. She's been in that position previously, having served in the legislature. Lupe Contreras, who's a great guy over on the west side, will be the Assistant Minority Leader. Martin Quezada and Victoria Steele round out the co-whip positions. They're the committee chairs for the Senate. Warren Peterson will take over as Jude Chair as he shifts from the House to the Senate. Senator Mesnard retains control of the Commerce Committee. David Gowan, Appropriations Committee Chair. And then last thing to point out, Tyler Pace from Mesa will get to be the Transportation Committee Chair, which is an interesting position to be in as we go into reauthorization of the Regional Transportation Plan. So that bodes well for Mesa. Otto's going to touch on these, but Proposition 207, which is recreational marijuana, passed rather handily. Proposition 208, which is the surcharge on the highest tax bracket in Arizona, passed just barely, but we now have that, and Otto will drill down into that a little bit deeper as well. In terms of county races, Jack Sellers beat out Jevin Hodge. Talked back yesterday. They're on schedule to certify the Maricopa County results at 3:30 this afternoon. And then the state has until next Monday, Monday the 30th, to certify its results, and then we can put all of the court issues and whatnot behind us, at least in Arizona. Steve Chukri, who we endorsed as well, won his seat. Bill Gates, Clint Hickman also won their seats, and then Steve Gallardo ran unopposed. Mesa, question 1. Thank you, Councilmember Thompson. Passed by 68.7%. This will bring a lot of money in for infrastructure in the city, most notably in the eastern part of the city and the western part. And we look forward to leveraging those dollars to bring down regional dollars to help our citizens. On the governing board, Laura Ellingson and Joe O'Reilly were endorsed by the chamber. They got in. Kiana Sears also got a seat on the governing board. We were a bit surprised that Rich Crandall didn't make it, but I think he'd even tell you that he ran kind of didn't run a strong campaign. I think he thought his name ID would carry him a little bit further than it did, but we look forward to working with all 3 of those individuals. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll give it back to you, and Otto can talk a little bit more about the practical application or the impacts of Proposition 207 and 208. Unless there are questions, of course.
Sorry, thank you. So sorry, trying to unmute. Thank you, Eric. That was, am I still muted? No. Can you hear me? Uh-oh.
You're good, Joan. We can hear you.
Oh, okay, good.
Now we can.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Schilla, if you wouldn't mind, we appreciate your insight into the propositions and their impact on our state and our communities.
Okay. Thanks very much, Madam Chair. The first is Prop 207, the recreational marijuana. So now everyone will need to learn how to say dude. You know, I think this one's going to have the same concern for businesses that the medical marijuana did. And the big question for employers is, how do you know when somebody's impaired? The statute specifically provides that the presence of metabolites can't be used as evidence of impairment. Metabolites stay in your system for at least 30 days after you consume the marijuana. So the unlike a blood alcohol test, which is pretty straightforward, you can't use the same kind of test for medical marijuana. So I think we still expect the jobs directly related to safety, equipment operators, truck drivers, particularly those regulated by the Federal Department of Transportation. They're going to have less tolerance, and there won't be a big worry, because I think federal standards should be pretty clear. But the problem comes, what happens if 2 weeks ago you had a party and now you come to work and you've got metabolites in your system? When are you impaired? And we just don't know. Even with the recreational marijuana, a standard has not been developed yet to determine impairment. So we're going to be working through with all of our clients how to develop policies that are non-discriminatory, but since you can't use the metabolites as a benchmark, then it's going to be interesting to figure out what you do use. I guess that's about all I have to say about that, because it's sort of up to medical science. Eric, anything you've heard on that score?
No, that kind of runs it down. I mean, you can have a drug-free workplace policy. Hopefully you have one in place currently, but like Otto said, how do you determine if someone is impaired?
And with respect to the drug-free workplace policy, remember that Arizona has a statute that if your policy complies with the statute, then you're relieved of liability when you follow it. So worth taking a look at that statute and comparing it to your policies. It'll be interesting to see what the Industrial Commission does with this. Although you know, sometimes they're a little wishy-washy, but they may be the best gauge for how this is going to go over, because they're charged both with the safety issues and with making sure that people are treated properly in the workplace in Arizona, at least. So, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with all of this and a new administration. I guess right now it depends on what happens in Georgia. If 2 seats go Democratic, the last 2 seats go Democratic in these runoff elections that happen in January, then the Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. So you could anticipate maybe some more left-leaning tendency. So you may see the NLRB strengthened and become more active again. You may see more from the EEOC and others. So that's going to put the employers in tension with those forums and Arizona law and the Industrial Commission.
Otto, Keith asked a question on chat about what about operating equipment and machinery. As I understand it, we have a no-fault workers' compensation system in Arizona, as do every other state, I think, whereby if there is an injury on the job due to recreational or even medicinal marijuana or any controlled substance, that the workers' compensation system kicks in. That worker or any other injured workers are brought back to work, made whole, made healthy again. However, what we're talking about is liability. Is that correct?
Yeah. Here's the big problem. Under OSHA and Arizona's program that's developed under OSHA, every employer has a responsibility to provide a safe workplace. So it's not just about the person who wants to consume marijuana, it's about the person that person works next to, right? So I think that you probably, Keith, as I said, the federal government, the Department of Transportation on Department of Transportation related jobs is going to have a no tolerance policy. We won't let pilots fly drunk. There are specific rules about that. I'm hopeful, at least, and fairly confident that as more states do this, they're going to have to develop something about marijuana, or they're going to have to start enforcing. It's still an illegal substance. It's still a controlled substance. So theoretically, all of this temper tantrums by all the states could be shut down by the feds anytime if they were so inclined. But with respect to non-DOT jobs, then I think we may, as a state, we may have to adopt legislation to specify that in equipment operations or other safety related jobs, here's the standard, and you just can't do it in the last 30 days or whatever. Voter initiatives are really tough. It's a constitutional right to have voter initiative, and once passed, we can't mess with it. That frankly needs to be changed in Arizona, and we should all be focused on that. This election was, in these instances at least, was affected by a lot of out-of-state money and out-of-state interests. And I think it's just plain wrong that Arizona has this stuff put on its plate by people who don't live here and don't have anything to do with this, and they're beating one note on a piano and the rest of us have to live with it. But I think in general, I think the answer is you can be more stringent about your requirements for safety related things. I would also think that if something's related to finances or confidential information, you could probably be more stringent with those. But remember, you're gonna have to do all of this in a non-discriminatory way. And the only metric that anybody knows about, the statute now says you cannot use, just as it does in medical marijuana.
Otto, there was a question from Mike Jackson on chat. I have employees who drive customers' cars. What liability do we carry in a vehicle accident? Same as heavy equipment operations.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that's part of your business, I mean, the first thing I would do if I were you is I would review your insurance with your insurance agent. Many small businesses make the mistake of buying the wrong policy to cover that kind of liability. So I've had businesses that think that because they're small, they just run their cars on their homeowner or their home and auto policy, and it's only a car or two, and or maybe they'll use their own car and they'll send somebody who works for them in the car to go do an errand, and usually that's excluded coverage. While you can loan your car to anybody, no home and auto insurer expects to be paying commercial liability claims. And so if you get in an accident when that happens, there could be a problem. So the first line of defense is talk to your insurance company. There's nobody better in the world at figuring out what the risks are and how much to charge for them than a good commercial insurance company. So I think the first step is to make sure that your liability, your insurance is appropriate to the liability you're undertaking. Make sure you disclose it in writing when you're applying for your policies, so that there can be no question if your coverage isn't adequate, that you disclosed everything you needed to disclose. I also think we'll see more from Copper Point Mutual, because they're still a premier workers' comp provider. Those folks are going to have to pay the claims, and so I think they're an important resource to look to. But we'll see. The trouble with voter initiatives is you can't change them. You can do things to enhance them, but you can't do anything to detract from the rights put in them, and so it's a hard thing to know exactly what to do, but I'm sure discussions are going on about that very issue. Eric, have you heard about any plans or plots?
No, they're still trying to get past the election. No, I'm sure you're right, but I have not heard of any auto at this point as to whether they're going to discuss the metabolite issue and how to determine impairment.
Yeah. And then Prop 208 puts a 4% surtax on anybody making $250,000 a year or more as a single person, or $500,000 as a married couple. So in this instance, getting married is good tax planning. You got more room. The big problem that this one provides, quite frankly, is most small businesses are either limited liability companies, the entities of which are disregarded for federal tax purposes and state tax purposes, or which have made an election to be treated as an S corp. By the way, that's a terrible thing to do. If you want to be treated as an S corp, make a corporation. Don't be a limited liability company, because you're likely to adopt an operating agreement that will blow your S election and your tax planning will get all messed up. But that's how most small businesses do it. They're all in some kind of pass-through entity, which means that the net income of the entity flows through to them for tax purposes, whether or not they take the money. So the big fear is that now business income is going to flow through to business owners, and if it's more than the $250,000 or $500,000 threshold, they're going to get hit with tax, and the cash needs to stay in the business. I suppose that may not be a problem as long as, if you've only got a single business, but if you got multiple businesses and they're flowing income through, it could be a big problem. So I was at the Arizona Tax Research Association meeting yesterday and the board meeting afterwards, and there are apparently top secret discussions going on about what to do about this initiative, but it has the same limitations that the others, the other statute that we talked about has, and so what to do and how to do it is not simple. Mark's asking, what kind of business recovery bills might we see in the coming session? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, because we're so evenly split. Eric, you got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, there have been a couple conversations about two issues surrounding business recovery. One is unemployment insurance, and what do we do with that? Arguably, our benefits are low. The threat there is that an organization would put something on the ballot um, and try and voter protect it. Um, so I think now that the Republicans have retained control, that discussions will be on hold until we see what happens in the federal stimulus. And then there is discussion about what we can do within Arizona um, to help spur business, another jobs package, if you will. Those really haven't had a whole lot of discussion yet. We're trying to get past the election, number one. Number two, figure out how we're going to run the legislative session. And then number three, what the priorities are. So more to come, but that's just kind of the noise that we're hearing, Mark.
I listened to the governor's speech at the Department of Health a couple of days ago, and he makes a good point that Arizona struck a pretty good balance of sticking to the basics and wash your hands, wear masks when you're close to people, don't go to big groups, and stay away from people. And I think we've fallen into a pretty good rhythm of doing that. I think everybody overreacted in the beginning, and shutting everything down may not have been necessary. But back at that time, nobody knew. I remember the medical professionals were debating about whether anything other than an N95 mask helped, and their perspective was focused on filtering inbound material, not protecting others from outbound contamination. So I think this, even with the surge going on, I mean, there's no scientific reason that the disease should stop. I mean, nothing happened except everybody went home. So we'll see if we can be more moderate with business. But are there any other questions about 207 and 208? Any thoughts or concerns?
Councilmember Thompson asked how the legislature is going to react to education funding now that 208 has passed. I have my thoughts, but Otto, any thoughts how they're going to react?
Cut it by 4%? I don't know. I have no idea.
Kevin, if history is any indicator of future events, we passed Proposition 123. That put money into the education system. We passed Proposition 301 extension. That put money into the education system. We enacted 20 by 2020. That put money into the education system. Now that Proposition 208 has passed, I don't expect anything different from education advocates that we're not properly funding education. You have to remember that Prop 208 didn't add anything to the baseline funding for education. What it did is it puts money into a pot that will be distributed to K-12 organizations, charters, and districts through a grant process. So I can see where education advocates will say we still need to get that baseline funding level up and continue to beat their drum for more dollars.
Well, and I think that the way that sort of works that way now in at the state level, where funds are allocated based on a number of criteria. It's not equal money across the board, and there are districts with more resources and less resources, and usually it's an economic divide. So the poorer districts typically get less money, or at least on a dollar for dollar basis. Although there's a proportional formula that the state follows. And so part of the problem with 208 is, as Eric says, it kind of sets that process up all over again. It doesn't demand equality. It certainly doesn't send money to teachers. So the problem with this, and I'm, I'm kind of back on the bandwagon of doing something about the initiative process, because it was sold to people as help the teachers, but the money doesn't go to the teachers. It goes back to the administrators again. It goes back to somebody to do a grant process. It goes to legal defense if somebody wants to file a lawsuit to try and invalidate the law. It goes to a lot of places, but not to teachers, at least not directly. So, this idea is as bad as any other one that's come along. And so the question is, what can we do about it? And what can we do to influence the grant process? Or, I don't know what the issues are.
Otto, we're shifting from Prop 208 back to 207 and getting some questions about recreational marijuana and an ordinance done by the city of Mesa. Kevin Thompson, do you want to talk about that, or there's someone else on the call who can talk to that?
Oh yeah, we have staff here. I know Ian and Miranda both are here, but we're going to be voting on a ordinance, I believe, December 1st. That for basically for 207 for the legalization of recreational marijuana. It's from what we're being told, it closely resembles what Gilbert passed in their ordinance, and almost mirrors what Scottsdale, Chandler, and Avondale are doing as well. So all the cities are trying to all be on the same page and not all over the place. So I don't necessarily know that it's anything that's going to be too outlandish. I don't know, Ian, do you or Miranda have any input?
Yeah, so basically just what you said is totally correct. So Mesa currently has around 10 or 11 medical marijuana dispensaries. And so the proposition allowed municipalities to limit recreational marijuana sales to only existing medical marijuana dispensary license holders. So it's assumed, this gets a little bit into the weeds, so to speak, but it assumes that all the recreational marijuana or medical marijuana license holders will become recreational marijuana license holders. So they are all allowed to sell recreational marijuana. But what Gilbert did, what we're contemplating doing, what our council will be looking at, is limiting it to just those 10 or 11 dispensaries in Mesa, because the proposition provides for an additional 26 or so licenses that can be spread out around the state. And so if our council were to pass this ordinance that they're contemplating, none of those would be allowed to locate in Mesa. It also does some things like prohibits delivery of recreational marijuana. I think we're doing some things on city property, for example, where you can't you can't consume marijuana products on city property and that sort of thing as well.
That was my question. So thank you very much for addressing that. Municipalities try to, I know, take as much responsibility for these things where they can. So I'm glad to see everybody's working ahead of that. Any other questions regarding either of the propositions for our esteemed guests? No? Okay. Any final words? Otto, Eric, Mr. Thompson, anybody?
No, federal preemption would be nice.
Okay. Sally, do we have anything else that you'd like to cover on today's agenda? Where did you go? There you are.
We're good.
Okay. All right. Well, I thank you everybody for your attendance, and happy Thanksgiving. Be safe. I'll talk to you in a month. Thank you.
See y'all later.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye now.
Be